Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you my RC4WD drive Trailfinder 2 long wheelbase chassis coupled with the Killerbody LC70 build. I'm going to go through all the trouble I had making it, all the issues I encountered, and what I did to overcome these issues. And hopefully the information in this video is going to help anyone thinking of building or creating their own RC crawler. Now, this was my first attempt at building anything that was kind of custom or put together myself. And it was a very, very long journey, okay? So there are going to be a lot of mistakes. I do make a lot of, shall we say, amateur mistakes, but I'm guessing anyone starting out in the hobby might be encountering the same issues, so let's get to it. First of all, I'd like to give a big shout out to E3SRC, that YouTube channel. Those of you who follow that channel will also notice that this looks very, very similar, and that's because this is a replica of one of their builds. I watched their channel and they have a build almost exactly like this. After seeing it, I loved it. I wanted to copy it. So I asked them for permission. They gave me their blessing and said, go for it. So here it is. This is my replication of one of their builds and I'm just in love with it. The first time I saw it on their channel, I thought it looked amazing. The build just was, it really appealed to me and I wanted one exactly like it. So color and everything, that's exactly what I did. So let's start off with all the main issues I had when I began this build. The first thing you're going to notice is if you go for an Killerbody LC70 hard body, like I did here, and install the interior, the mating system it has to mount on top of an RC4WD drive Trailfinder 2 long wheelbase chassis is going to be very difficult because, as some people have said online, it doesn't really fit properly. If you don't have the interior installed, then it's absolutely fine. It can go on, but then you're going to have some fitment issues in other areas. You need mounting brackets and stuff. And this was a massive learning curve for me because there's no guide. I don't think there was any guide anyway online that teaches you exactly what fitments you need to fit on what chassis. It's kind of a give it a go. You may have to modify a few parts, try this and try that. If it does work, it works. If it doesn't, you're going to have to do some custom work. So that's where we landed. So let's start with the body first of all. This is the Trailfinder 2, as I said. This is a different bed. I think it's known as the steel bed, which is an optional part which goes onto the rear here. The one that comes with the actual kit that you buy is slightly different. This one has all these moving parts. This panel here can come down, unclip. These fold down, so it becomes like a flat bed with these side panels just folded down here. So let's start with the body first. As you can see, it's been painted in this kind of glossy blue paint. This is the closest, I didn't have any paint code, so this is the closest I could see that it was kind of matched to. There's a Toyota color that the truck is available in. I can't remember what country, possibly Australia. But the actual truck does come in a choice of colors and this is very close to one of them colors. The best I could do was find reference pictures online and then go to my hardware store and buy the blue paint that matches it best to my eyes. So for anyone who hasn't built this kit or are thinking of building this kit and using this kit, this information might help you. First of all, let's talk about these moving doors. Almost everything on this kit is an optional part, okay? So you can buy the basic kit, which comes with a different bed, as I said. And I believe the doors were non-movable, but all the optional parts that I got were the ones I wanted moving. So the doors, the light up dash inside the interior cockpit. The original cockpit that comes with the kit is just like a plastic molded piece that's very flimsy. It goes inside. If you paint it up and everything, it looks great. You don't really need any of this. Specifically, this is what I wanted. I also wanted the folding windows, which if you look here, this is what it looks like. The window does fold down, and just so that you know, the windows aren't hard or anything. They're kind of like this. It's like this very flexy film so that there's nothing to smash. But if you do crease them or fold them, they will have the crease in them forever. The kit does come with the snorkel there included as part of the body, which I really like. If you're used to a lot of other hard bodies from different companies, the snorkel is usually an extra part. So I'm super stoked that that came with it. On this side, if you have a look at this window here, As I said, I opted for the wind down windows. I don't know if I actually said, but I opted for the wind down windows. That's why the window could come down. This one's a little bit misty, and that's because it's still got the protective film on it, which I purposely kept on the window just so that I could show you what it came with and what it looks like. It's been absolutely killing me because I've been dying to rip that off, as I completed this build almost a year ago, and I really wanted this to be finished, but I had to keep this on there, and it was absolutely killing me because I wanted to show you guys. So this is the protective film that it comes with before you take it off. Once you peel off the film, it's going to be clear like the other side. Moving on to the door, we have the locking system here. I don't know if it's the way I installed this door locking mechanism or the way I put it together, but it feels a little bit clunky and it's not working absolutely correctly for me. So you push it to the rear, the door gets pushed out by a little knob down here, which is spring loaded. And I want to show you how the door sits when you close the door. So on mine, you actually have to push the door in, push the latch back so it goes back, and push it forward again, and it kind of locks the door in place. As you can see, if you look here, that spring-loaded knob on the bottom there pushes the bottom part of this door outwards, so there's a bit of a gap here. I did try uninstalling the knob there, but one thing I noticed is if I did that, the bottom wouldn't stick out, but the top would. So as you can see this gap here, if you look there like that, it's kind of close to the body, little gap there, but without that knob on the bottom pushing the bottom, this part would stick out quite a bit and there would be an unsightly gap on the top there. So I opted to keep the spring-loaded knob in the bottom there. Just to give you a quick close-up of the paint on this bar, and I'm really happy how it turned out. It almost looks metal. It looks like it's painted metal, so very pleasing to the eye when you look at it. I believed this sticker here was an extra, I can't remember because it was about a year ago, but this is metallic. I opted for an optional sticker that goes on here. The original one that came with the kit was just literally just a sticker, so just like a vinyl sticker, but this one is a metallic piece that goes on there. The bonnet does pop. You push on the front there, right there, like that, and it pops up, and we see the bonnet there. Now I did a little bit of work to the stick here. It kept falling down. Originally, you get this little black, it's like a clamp there, and every time I clamped it on, it kept falling down. So I just installed a magnet there, and that keeps it up. So you just pull it down there and put this down onto the front there, and it holds the bonnet up. I also put a little bit of heat shrink wrap here on the end here so it doesn't scratch it, like that. But once you pull it up, the magnet holds it in place. This can come down and clip back in place. The front here is painted in a matte paint there. I believe that's the way they did it on the E3S RC channel, and I really liked the look of that, so I kind of replicated. I believe this was supposed to be chrome originally, but the way they did it, I just thought it looked so much neater and tidier. Moving on to the windscreen here, as you can see there, there's a black rim that goes around here. This is very thick and very wide. Originally, that was supposed to be a sticker. So you get the sticker pack and you put it on here. I completely messed that up. I installed it on a dry windscreen, crooked. So there were bubbles and folds, and then I had to peel it off, which stretched it. And when I put it back on, it didn't fit completely and the bubbles were still there, only we had more of them. And then I went online to try and find out how other people did it. And it turns out you're supposed to wet this, or you can wet this with some soapy warm water all over there. You just lay the sticker on, and then the sticker you could just move about while it's wet, and once it's set you just let it dry, and that's apparently how you do it. At that point I had ruined my sticker, so I was kind of screwed. So what I did in the end, this isn't a sticker. What I did was I had some paint, which is for the polycarbonate shells, I believe, for like, you know, Tamiya models and stuff like that. I just put a stencil on the inside and I sprayed the inside of the window part. And this is actually sprayed on, so it's permanent, not a sticker, it's actual paint. And it turned out okay. I saved that only just, but I was panicking after I did that because otherwise I would have had to buy a new sheet. The same with the rear here. Once I had learnt that trick of doing it with the soap, I really wanted to, there's no way I could have painted the rear window. As you can see here, the sticker includes these, what looks like the bars for, I think it's a sliding window on the rear. It's just a sticker, but to put that on there, I wet it this time and made sure there's loads of soapy water, laid it on there, and it just slipped on as if it was just a slippery piece of plastic. Once it was in the position I wanted, I just let it dry, and that's that. So if you're doing that, that's a quick tip for you. Not my tip, something I learned from someone else, which I'm sharing with you. So there you go. On the back here, there is a truck bed simulation going on here, which is just like spray painted matte paint, really. That goes on here. It's very hard wearing, so I'm super stoked about that. Sorry about the cat here. But this real estate here gives you so many options. You can mount so many of your tools or camping gear on here, and it's going to look really fabulous when you go crawling. The side panels here, as I said before, do come down. So this clip just unclips over here like that, and this unclips that way, and all the panels come down. That gives you a very neat flat bed on the rear. The same with all the other panels. Moving back to the rear window, this clear part to act as the glass is one piece that goes from here over the roof down to here. I had to cut the inside of some parts to make it fit a bit better with the internal parts in here. I also had to repair some parts here, and that's because a screw, if I just move this over, you probably will be able to see there's a screw there, and that screws through the body, through the hole in the plastic piece there, and a nut goes on the inside. Once you squeeze those two parts together or screw them together enough to hold it in place, if you put too much pressure like I did, you will actually crack the inside of the clear part, the part that acts as the glass. Because of that, I had to put some glue on there to repair that part. You could just put some tape on there to prevent it from splitting if you've done that. But the point is, best not to tighten that up too much because it's going to crack that piece there. That was one part that I was a little bit disappointed at. Now let's get a little bit closer to the steel bed and we'll talk about these screws. This kit has a lot of these mini screws that they go there. They're just a bit bigger than a pencil's head. They screw in here like this, and this is what's holding it in. I've added a tiny bit of detail on the kit just there. What I've done is put a little bit of chrome gilding solution on the edge so it looks like it's a metal bar inside, just a little bit of detail. But the main thing I want to talk about is the screws. The mounting holes for these screws are very, very small, obviously because these screws are very, very small. The screws screw in there and it holds this very small and thin plastic bar on top, and that is actually what's holding each of these panels on, this part here. The problem is, these holes are so small and the screws are so small, when you screw them in, they will snap off. Here is an example of one of the screws that have snapped off. And that's because they're so small, they're very, very delicate. Learning this, I found out that I used a very, very small drill bit, like a modeler's drill bit, and I just widened the hole ever so slightly so that these screws can still go in there, bite into the plastic, but not snap off. Also bear in mind, if you paint your kit like I did, the holes are going to be even smaller because the paint is obviously going to fill out the hole a little bit more, and because there's such little play in there, such little room for error, it's going to make it even tighter. So definitely if you've sprayed this, you're probably going to want to have to widen this hole just a tiny fraction. Be very, very careful though, because if you widen these holes too much, the screws won't even be able to screw in. They'll just go straight through, and then you have another problem, which is the screw has nothing to go into. Moving to the rear of the kit, you can see the light housings here. I really, really like what they've done here. If you don't have this kit and you've never seen it before, you're going to be very, very convinced that these are those lenses that have those kind of jagged diamond parts on them. The light housing inside is obviously all reflective, but what these actually are is just a sticker. It's just a sticker with the shapes on, and it's so convincing. It looks really realistic from a small distance, but when you get really close, when you've made the kit yourself, you can see that these diamond shapes are just printed on there. So it looks very, very cool. Now we're going to have a look at the battery box back here. Once you mount this onto your chassis, you're going to realize there's nowhere on the bottom to mount your battery. So the obvious choice would be to mount it on top. This also gives you the benefit of being able to do quick battery changes, because anyone coming from most of the other kits will understand sometimes when it's time to change your battery, usually you have to take the hard body off, which involves clips or screws or some kind of mounting system, which can be quite troublesome in certain situations. But when you have the battery box on top mounted like this and have it as a quick change system, it just goes like that. and your battery goes in there. This battery box was by a company I believe called VM. I'm not too sure who they are or what they did, but I saw this box. I liked the look of it because of that non-slip plate on top there, all the miniature screws, and the size was perfect, so that's where I mounted it. Having a look inside the box, you can see how the battery actually gives its cable to the bottom of the chassis, and that is through there. All I did was I cut a hole just big enough to wiggle the head of the connector through, and the way it's mounted on here is by 2 screws here. Now the 2 screws do screw through, but into the body there, that is actually sloped. I counteracted that using some black hot glue inside here, squirted in there, and that keeps the void filled up. So it still screws in there, it's held tight, and there's no vibration. There's no way for this to wiggle. It's solid mounted on there. The screws that come through the underside here are very sharp, so what I've done is sanded them off and just put a dab of hot glue on each one, just so that if the battery jumps, they don't stab into it. There's also a very, very powerful magnet, which I installed there, and is very, very tight and quite hard to pull up. Moving on to the top of the hard body, you can see that there's a roof rack here, which I purchased. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was made by CC Hand. A very expensive piece. The roof rack they had on the E3 SRC channel was a custom made system, I believe. I believe they welded it themselves, and it just looks so much better. And their light systems were also a lot better, but there's no way for me to do that. So the only way I can replicate that was get the next best thing, or the closest thing, which was a ready-made steel roof rack system that I could mount on here. The lights on the front there are by CC Hand. I had to custom make some LEDs go in there and some cables that are mounted up in parallel with their own rated resistor to each LED, and it comes with these IPF covers. Inside there, as you see, the system actually was quite black when I bought it, but I used a gilding solution and made the inside of there chrome to look like there's a reflector. The model is equipped with a lighting system. There was no lighting system that I was happy with on the market, so I had to buy one that was not designed for it. I went for an SYRC light control box that was designed for a completely different model, which meant all of the wires were the wrong length, but they had the correct lights and LEDs that I required, so that's the one I went for, and I just modified it to fit this one. Going forward with the topic of LEDs, the interior is installed with an optional light up dash. A couple of things need to be said about that. As you can see on the inside here, the interior is very, very detailed. I painted it in a plastic grey to try and simulate a softer, that Toyota plastic that you get. The whole thing lights up and went together perfectly. And we're going to talk about fitment after we talk about the lights. Now the lights do light up. If you look at the dash there, it's centralized quite well, but originally the light up portion, so the LED panel that goes inside, was slanted. It wouldn't mount on straight or non-tilted. It was always in the way, and that's because there was a screw in the way. Some light modification to that panel, just drilling and sanding out some parts that were protruding, allowed it to sit correctly true and straight, so I'm super happy with that. Looking at the driver's side, you can see the steering wheel there, which I believe is adjustable, just up and down, a little bit of articulation, which is pretty cool. It also has this little part, this little handrest here, which goes up. There's a flap. It's very flimsy. When I was installing the screws on there, the screws wouldn't go on straight, and then when they would go in, they would almost threaten to break the connecting points they was on. So the kit is very well made, very, very detailed, but some parts are extremely, extremely fragile and a little bit susceptible to damage. So it's a looker, and it's quite durable, but when you're putting it together, be very, very cautious of all the thin plastics and parts you're using. Also, if you do like the articulation of moving doors, be very, very cautious. This part here will rub against the body here, which means eventually the paint is going to come off. I don't know if you can see there, but yes, the paint is starting to rub off there. I have been told that this is quite standard on these kits. It's not the fault of myself, but I don't know. As long as you don't, well, you're not going to be opening the doors every single day when you use it, so that's absolutely fine. Now let's move to the underside of this model kit. Once you've installed this panel here, you can see that there are two cutouts which I've done here. And that is because once you install this on there, they protrude down so much that they interfere with the RC4-wheel drive's Trailfinder 2 long wheelbase chassis. The two chassis bars literally ride along here like this and sit inside. After noticing this, after gluing these two panels in because they're separate parts, this part and this part, once they were glued in true, all I did was measure up to see where the bar would interfere with this interior and cut them away. If you do this accurately enough, which I believe I have, once the hard body sits on the chassis, there's no gap, and because the chassis is black, it's almost invisible, which leads on to the mounting system which I'm using for this, which I kind of had to develop myself or buy parts for, and I'll show you that in a minute. But right now, while we're here, let's have a look at the lighting system and the control box for the lighting system that I used. So as I said, I used the SYRC control box, which has been mounted here. This was the most logical place for me because it's flush with the body like that, and it's protected. Now this part here doesn't come with the kit, but it is an extra which I made, and I call it the protection bar, to protect all the wires in here and all the connecting points here. And that's because all this is exposed on the other side. When you go crawling, all the rocks and gravel and sand is going to fly up possibly and smack into that, and you don't want it to directly hit all the wires, especially when you've mounted them nice and cleanly inside. It's one point of protection. So what this is if you buy a plastic kit, there's usually a lot of extra plastic parts left over. This was from a Defender, an RC4 drive 2015 Defender. I believe it was the rear seat mounts. It was literally just an L-shaped piece of plastic that I cut to this shape, and I had this cut out here for the wires, this cut out here for the wires, and then drilled some holes through here into the body. So there's a screw that goes in there and the screw that goes in there, and that's how this is mounted on there, and it just protects everything from when you're driving a bit aggressively. This is the one connecting wire that comes off the control box and goes onto the secondary control box on the chassis underneath. So it's one wire connection, and once it's connected on there, you don't even have to take it off because battery changes are done on the top. So that's that. Coming off these wires are the 6 wires that go to the rear here. I've had these put in a very hefty shrink wrap and mounted on there with the mounting clips which come with the SYRC control box set, and they're just mounted up to the rear here, as you can see. One there, one there, one there. One note about this kit is these light systems on the back there are literally just held on by this little blue thin piece of plastic. It's just held on by that, that's it. So they are very, very fragile. If you bump into something on this side here, that will snap off. Looking at the rear here, this is also an optional extra, which is a mudguard. This one is metal, and it has some patterns on the underside, on the top side there, and I went for the Toyota mud flaps there, which are pretty rubbery and pretty good. Originally, this kit also come with an extra bar here, which is supposed to be mounted there. The reason mine doesn't have it, and others sometimes remove it too or don't install it, is because when the wheel comes up, the tire comes right up to here and only misses the top, depending on your setup, by a few millimeters. Also, there's some really sharp screws on the inside here. I didn't file these ones down or protect them this time because the tire does come up, but it doesn't hit those. Okay, it just comes up enough and stops about 2 or 3 millimeters away from the arch. The light system then has wires that go to the front part of the hard body, and as you can see, they're mounted in here, the indicator there, and the front lights here. Now, if you're looking at the front portion of the engine bay part portion here, as you can see, there are a lot of parts that are being grinded away or modified, because when I was looking for a suitable mounting system, there was a lot of experimentation involved. And that, number one, was this part here had to be filed away, and a section over here had to be filed away, and that was to give way to the posts on the chassis. Also over here, if we have a look, this post had to be cut down and this post had to be cut down. And that was because I was trying a different mounting system which had screws that went from the actual chassis over to here through a mounting bar that didn't quite work out. Also, this portion here was ground out. I believe it was because I was trying to install a larger motor on here, and this fouled it only just, so I had to cut the curve in there. But it was really fun experimenting because it was an ongoing project for many, many weeks, and encountering problems and then finding solutions was very rewarding, and I suppose that's why we enjoy building these so much. Moving back this way, we can see that there is this portion here. That's a mounting system for a spring-loaded portion here, and also the way the body sits onto the chassis there. This part here had to be cut down, so it was protruding too much, I believe, this way. So all I had to do was file it down, this part as well, file it down enough so that it would fit completely onto the chassis without fouling anything and raising anything too high. And those with a good eye can already see the mounting system come together. This part here is a very powerful rare earth magnet. I went to a magnet dealer and they had all different shapes and sizes and powers of magnets which you could install, and all I did was buy this magnet and install it there like this. As you can see, it's actually screwed through there with a nut on the other side holding it tight, and the same as this one here. If you're creating a mounting system like this, is you do not want to mount this magnet on there completely tight. Okay, there needs to be a little bit of play in it. So even though you've screwed and bolted it on or used a nut on the other side, this has to have a little bit of play. And that's because if the magnet is solid mounted on the system, there is a small gap that creates an air gap that prevents it from mating together with the underside magnet. What I found was that once this has a little bit of play on it, the magnet actually works literally about 5 times stronger. So originally you could just lightly pull it and it would come off, but now you've got to actually pull the two pieces apart. You have to pull the top part of the body away from the chassis in order to take it off. Now let's move on to the chassis portion of the video. I'm going to start with the front end here because that's probably the most fun part. What I've installed is this bumper here. I believe it was by CC Hand, but I can't remember correctly, and it comes as a set and a kit. Now this kit can actually come as just a bumper and sides, I believe, and also they do the version which I wanted, which was the one with the protection bar. I'm not too sure what to call that, but it looks like a protection bar on the side here, and I just thought that adds so much of detail to the kit that is exactly what I really wanted. So we went for a kit that has this bumper here, this sidebar which actually screws and bolts into here, and that bolts into this side here like this, and it comes with this really strong and sturdy side panel, side step there, and that really adds so much detail to the kit. Now the bumper is mounted on here with a solid block here, so it kind of heightens the part here, goes and slips inside, and this just screws in like that. As you can see, this does give you enough room to mount a winch on the front here. I went for an RC 4-wheel drive, I believe it's a 9.5 CTI S, I believe, with all the wires tucking it just under here. That can be hidden quite well. If too many wires were bunched together, instead of using zip ties, what I did was use, again, my favorite, some heat shrink wrap there like that, just to keep them tidy, and then have them just zip tied to the side there. There was a little bit of dynamic that had to go into the build here because these side steps do screw into here, but what I wanted to do was mount, instead of having a leaf spring system up front, I wanted dual shocks, just like as you see here. The problem with that is the dual shock system has a mounting point which has to be bought separately, I believe, as you're using all of these connecting rods here and all these connecting rods here, and what they do is they connect to the chassis here. That means this whole portion here wouldn't fit because obviously this was straight. So all you had to do, or all I had to do, was cut out a shape there using a Dremel so that this could fit onto the chassis and this could fit on the chassis, and they could fit together and mate together properly, just like that. So the kit did need a little bit of modification, as the setup I wanted was not traditional. But if you want to have a look at how the bar system and the suspension system is mounted, this is how. Okay, so we have spacers here. How many that is installed will depend on your kit there. The suspension arm is mounted there. This looks like a 5mm spacer. Again, a 5mm spacer on that side. And this is how it was mounted. Just want to get enough detail in here so that you can see, because the research that went into doing this when I was building this, I had to use a lot of reference photos from other builds, and a lot of parts were very confusing to me. I wasn't sure, once you remove the leaf springs, how exactly are you supposed to mount this on here? When you do mount this on there, how are these connecting points going to mount on? Because I believe it is quite modular, shall I say, the way you mount these. This is the way that I discovered works for me. Also, this connecting rod here, as you can see there, that connecting rod down there was originally black, but it was very, very close to parts around it. Any moving parts and interlinking parts were exceptionally close to it. So what I did was I painted it yellow, and that would be like a marker for me. If the paint scrapes off or there's any damage to it in certain areas, I can see exactly which parts needed to move and what I needed to do to try and modify it. But it turns out everything was perfect. It doesn't tap anything and everything moves freely, and it's very, very reactive without being aggressive to itself. So it doesn't damage itself, it's not self-destroying, and everything seems to be working so far, touch wood. The motor there is by Hobbywing. Everyone knows what this system is. It is the 2300 or 2300 kV variant. And the reason I went for the slightly newer one was because it has a 6 amp output. I believe the original Hobbywing motor gave out 5 amps to the servo, but the slightly newer one, as to the date of this video, has 6 amps, which is quite beneficial. The servo there I'm using is a programmable AGF-RC system, which I got online. It's the first one I've ever tried, and so far I'm liking it very much. I'm not a professional anything. I'm an amateur that likes to build stuff and just crawl up very basic trails. Not even trails, I just like to drive it on straight roads. So how it works, it's very good. It does what I need to do, and I'm really having fun with it, but in no way can I give a proper review of it, because I just needed to move the wheels, and that's basically it for me. The suspension system was fantastic. One thing I noticed when I bought this dual post mounting system here was that the screw that came with it, that goes all the way through, was too short for some reason. I have no idea how you can get that part wrong, but they got it wrong. Unless I did something wrong, maybe I installed something wrong. But let's get a little bit closer to the system and see what I'm talking about here. This screw and post goes through from here all the way to here. The original screw that came with it, the M3 screw, stopped there and stopped there, so there was no place on the end to be screwed on there. So I was really confused. I kept trying to figure out how you were supposed to mount it. Maybe it was something I was doing wrong, but in the end I just ordered a new screw that was a lot longer, so I could put a spacer on the end here and a nylock nut on the end there, and that kind of holds that on there. The aside from the looks that I really like of this dual post mounting system, where you have 2 of these shocks, is obviously the looks are fantastic if you can match your shocks. But I also really liked the modularity of it, the way you can tune the front so that it's perfect. See, originally, if you only have, I say only, but in traditional systems, when you have one of the suspension turrets on this side and one on that side, you can go through different springs, and if they take oil, then you can try different weight oil to adjust your suspension to see how it reacts. With a dual post system, so there's quad, so there's 4 of them, they're so dynamic. You can put so many different types of spring in each one. So it'd be like spring 1 and spring 4, that would give you a certain rate of return and speed, or spring 5 and spring 3, and that would give you a completely different kind of return. So it was so adjustable, it was unbelievable, and I really, really enjoyed that. It wasn't even something I thought of before. I was doing this just for the look. It would kind of look like the other system that I was trying to copy, but then I found out how it was just so adjustable in the end that I'm super stoked. Really, really happy about that. Okay, so if we have a look, I'll just move this back slightly, and you can have a look at how the suspension works with the weight of the vehicle. Obviously it's going to weigh a little bit more once the hard body's on top, but this is how the system works. I believe I've got it to a point where I'm happy, where it's doing exactly what I want to do, and its reaction is pretty good. Before we move away from the front bumper here, I'd also want to say these two lights were just some cheap plastic housings that I bought from China. It's unbelievable what you can buy for the price nowadays. The ones I was looking at from a model shop were quite expensive, and I didn't want to spend the extra cash. When I saw these for very, very cheap online, I got them. They go with the lines and the look of everything quite well, so I'm super happy about that. They are just held on by some spacers, so the screw comes up from the bumper there, up through some spacers, and once the distance is enough from the bumper bar there and the light, then that's the correct spacer that I needed, so it screws onto there. Those are using, I believe it's two warm-ish in tint 5mm LEDs, which I rated coming off the light control box, and they have their own resistor, so they're pretty bright. As I like to adjust the way my LEDs are set, I never like anything running at maximum. So if whatever the maximum voltage is, and let's say the maximum an LED can take is 60 milliamps of power, or not power, sorry, 60 milliamps, I like to set it at about 28 to be really conservative, so that it's running at a nominal voltage without being overdriven. That's just the way I like it. I really hate revisiting LEDs once I've done them. Like, oh, this LED's blown, you have to take it out and, you know, and change it. I really hate that. So I'm very conservative when I set my ratings and stuff for LEDs. Now, this is the first time I've ever worked with a Trailfinder 2 long wheelbase variant. I mean, I'm not too sure about the dimensions or anything, or what millimeter it is. I just know it's known as the long wheelbase, and it's pretty long when you're coming from the Defenders and chassis that I'm used to. So obviously anything that, all the wires that get mounted on here, they have to be extended, because obviously the wires that come with all the electronics are not going to be long enough. So all the wires are routed together in some heavy duty shrink wrap again. They're all there together, and I purposely had the shrink wrap go around here very, very tightly, or the connections, and here. And that's because I don't want any vibration to vibrate this and make it come loose. The heavy duty shrink wrap also acts as a massive protection thing, so it makes it really, really hard and rigid, so it doesn't fold and flex. That's important because I didn't want this sinking and going down into any moving parts. That would be absolutely detrimental if it did that. So I'm super stoked that this became super tight, very, very sturdy, and it just rests on top there and is super safe. And then you just zip tie it into the positions you need, making sure none of the suspension fouls any of the wires, or nothing can get caught when you're out there having fun and having the time of your life crawling and everything. Those of you with an even keener eye are wondering how this winch is mounted on there with all the wires coming to the rear and no winch controller box. And that is because I stripped the winch controller box. All I did was I kept the circuitry for it. I just reconnected all the wires to it. So its footprint is really, really small, so it can fit inside this box here, and I had all the wires routed in back here. Now the box did get put in some see-through shrink wrap, so I can see what it's doing. It has some protection from vibration, but it was never a waterproof system anyway. But if I squirted some silicone inside the shrink wrap before shrinking it, it would become, or even Vaseline, then it would become somewhat waterproof. So that's not to worry about that. But all the electronics and everything managed to fit in here very snugly, and I'm super, super happy about that. I didn't get a new box this time because I didn't really want to spend extra money on that. It's a nice unit. I really enjoy the aluminium boxes that hold all the electronics, but this time, in order to save just a few pennies, I didn't go for it. Having a look at how this electronics box is mounted, you can see that the bars are not on top, they're underneath. So I had the box kind of placed underneath there. Sorry, I'm shaking the camera, but I'm just super stoked to show you guys this build. I'm really excited about it. It was built almost a year ago, but I was just so burnt out from working on it that I had to just leave it. I had to leave the project on display for about a year, and finally now I can come back to it, and I have the brain power to actually record this video. Right, so as you can see here, I've moved to the rear, but let's go back to the center because I want to talk about the mounting point there. These two are rare earth magnets, as you can see, two of them stacked together. I was told by the magnet company that made these magnets for me, they said if you stack them together, you're not going to have double the pulling power, like double the magnetic power of the thing. And I kind of disagreed with that. When I mount two magnets together, they feel extra strong, and they said it's not quite going to work like that on if you put them together like that. But anyway, I put two together anyway. It just felt stronger to me. I'm not too sure why that is, but as you can see here, the chassis already had two screw holes drilled in here for something else, for mounting something else. It might have been, it's probably the battery plate or something, but convenient holes just there. So the two magnets were stacked together, reverse polarity compared to the one that was mounted on the hard body, so that they attract each other rather than repel. And this one is screwed on there. This one is actually mounted on tight, as you don't need play in both of the mounting systems. As long as one of them has play, it's fine. That's from my experimentation anyway. So we got two of those, and the spacing was slightly off. There was about a millimeter gap on the top between the body. Once the hard body mounts on, there was a millimeter air gap. So on the bottom, I mounted a 1 millimeter spacer, and that solved the gap problem. So once that goes on, the hard body goes on, the two magnets find each other, pull each other together, and so that the positioning of the hard body is perfect. Exactly where I want it on the front, exactly where I want it on the rear, and exactly the correct distance in the center there. That's the way that's first mounted. That's not the only mounting point, that's just a guide, and it pulls itself together. If we come to the rear here, what we do see is this mounting bracket here. This is available from the Killerbody website, and let's have a look at which point of mount I've used, okay, or which hole. So if you look there, you can see this is the hole I used. You can kind of count how many holes or spaces I've used. It comes in silver, although I painted it in just a haphazard black off the shelf paint quickly just to kind of match it. Otherwise there would be this big silver bar here, which I kind of wanted it to blend in a little bit more. So this was kind of just painted black. As you can see, it's rubbing off there, but you don't really see it, so it's absolutely fine. This rear bumper here is from CC Hand, and it just mounts up like that. I really like the way they've got this big work bar in the bottom. This is the way the bumper sits, the rear bumper, and my little number plate is a plastic one this time. Usually I go for metal, but the model company that was making these, they used plastic, and they were doing for quite cheap, so I thought, yeah, I'd have one of them. I've never had an Alaskan one before, so that looks pretty cool. Really enjoying the way that looks. There's no number plate light for this car at the moment. I didn't have the patience or the time to do a number plate light for this. Let's quickly look at the underside of the chassis so that I can show you. We're using the full steel RC4WD Drive Punisher V2 drive shafts, one on the rear and one on the front. These for me were tried and tested. I really enjoyed them. They seem to be really hard wearing. None of them have failed on me yet. So those are the ones I opted for, as you can see. This is the leaf spring setup. I'm not sure if you guys are ever going to do this, but for anyone who is attempting this and they don't know how the shocks are mounted so they don't foul anything, this is the hole that I mounted the top in. There's a hole there. It's on the second hole from the outside. They're just mounted on that part there. I'm now going to show you how I've mounted the leaf spring on the rear here. As you can see, where it's connected in the center there is no spacer on the top. I've also opted for no spacer on the bottom, and the screws are just screwed onto the leaf springs direct to the unit. You'll also be able to see how many springs I've used. I've used two of the black ones. I was going to experiment with some of the red springs, which are some of the softer ones, but I was told that the black ones are fine and they'll eventually wear in where they become a little bit softer. The same goes for the leaf spring on the left side, with the exception of an anti-wrap bar mounted on top there. You probably won't be able to see it just yet, but from this angle you should be able to see the anti-wrap bar there just behind the drive shaft, and I'll explain to you why you need that. Most viewers already know what an anti-wrap bar does, but for those few viewers who, like me, didn't know what they did, this is the explanation for that. I'm going to use an elastic band as an example, and let's just pretend this is your leaf spring acting as suspension and your wheel is mounted here. Normally when you go over some bumps, when the suspension bottom's out, the spring will go like this. But sometimes, due to the positioning of the parts, the leaf spring can actually get warped. And we call that wrapping, and that's when the leaf spring, instead of just going up and down, it can twist slightly. If you twist it enough, it could damage the leaf spring. So you get an anti-wrap bar. And what that does is prevent any torsion or movement. It just allows the spring to go up and down, and it kind of saves your springs in the long run. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about the front bumper was this part here. Now there is a protrusion there, and that is a mounting point for an antenna or faux antenna to make it look like they've got those radio CB systems that they use, which is pretty cool. I really like that. I didn't get that. I believed it was something I will always snap off because of my clumsiness, so I opted not to go for one of those, even though I do like them. This protrusion is made of metal, and it was going to stab, scratch and destroy the front headlight. So all I did was put some heat shrink wrap over there. I do believe there's 2 layers of it on there, and heated it so it's kind of rubbery. So when I mount the body, if the body shoots forward by accident and the headlight smashes into it, it's not going to damage or scratch the headlight. I believe that's it. So let's mount the body on here and see how it goes. I'm going to try and do this on camera just so that you guys get a picture and a feel of exactly the process of when it goes on, how easy it is. So this just goes here. You don't have to do this all the time. As I said, the battery mounting box is on the top. So you literally just have to put the body on after a service or after a clean, and then it can stay on there, you know. After that, you literally just put the battery on the top, replace the battery, and away you go. Right, so this goes, first I hold it like this, and I slide the front in, just like that. It should line itself up and click. There you go, done. So the most important part you have to check is the front here. Is the front arch aligned with the bumper completely? Yes. Are the lights in the correct position, not fouling these 2 points on the front? Yes. And it's all mounted. Okay, so that's the temporary mounting position done. Now I'm going to show you exactly how it's mounted on properly. There are 4 mounting positions there for whatever bracket you're using. The only hole that I need to use for mine is that hole there and that hole there. A screw goes through there, and a nut from the bottom holds that in place. You also have to be very careful once you've done that, because if anything pulls on the front here to pull it up, let me just pull it up like that, then it's gonna yank it and snap the rear. Okay, so as I said, which I'm going to show you the interior now, before I told you that I cut 2 holes into the interior floor, and that is just there. That is the actual chassis bar. That's part of the chassis, but because it's been cut so close to the hole and there's literally no gap, no light passes through, and also it sits on and it aligns itself correctly, which really helps. And as you can see there, there's a screw hole there. So that allows you to place any mounting system. You could put like a block shape system, which you can cut to a small piece made of, I don't know, plastic, 3D print it or whatever. But that shape, whatever it is, can just go on the chassis there like that, and then you just screw it on. So that's kind of the permanent mount system I was going to use. And whenever you need to take it apart to service or clean or whatever, which for me is not going to be very often, all it is that screw there to take that bar off on each side, and the screw and nut on the rear there. So 1 of each, and well, 2 of each, and then that's it, away you go. And the rest of the time it's just held on by this magnet, which aligns itself. So that's kind of the mounting system I went for. So there's not really anything holding the front on, but it's going to be held on here in the center, so that part can't really pull off, and the rear there's going to be screwed on. So that's the mounting system I thought of, and for me it's going to work fantastically, and I'm very, very happy with the way it is. Just to show you guys also the battery wire, once I get it through the hole that goes through the bottom there and into the battery box, this is what it looks like once it's mounted on there. This comes through the hole like that, so that's always in there. All you do is put your battery system in here like that, and it just clips into the connector there, and this closes, and that should keep it safe. In case anyone wants to see how it looks underneath, once it's all mounted, this should give you a clear view. Also, it's really good future reference for me for one day when I come back to this and I have to take everything apart and I forget how everything goes. This is kind of reference to that and to help anyone else out there. So there you go, that's kind of how it's mounted on there. All the wires are quite well protected, safe, and in very good positions where no moving parts could interfere with them or possibly damage them. And that's it, guys. That was my video on this build. Hopefully I didn't miss anything out, and also that you enjoyed the video. I sure enjoyed doing this build. It took a very long time, a lot of research, and there were a lot of hurdles and steps where I was kind of confused and I had to rethink things a little bit, but that was the part of the fun of the project, I would say. So all in all, I enjoyed this from beginning to end, from the painting aspect all the way to the building, and kind of not really designing but piecing things together, as obviously I just bought these parts and slapped them all together to see which parts fit. Some modification work needed, as you saw, and I hope I covered them in depth enough, so if anyone attempts a build like this, then they have the information that will help them for their build. I wasn't able to run this very much, especially wasn't able to record this while I was running it, basically because if I'm controlling it, I won't be able to film it, and I don't really have the equipment to do so. I will try for the future to record some amateur footage of this running. So thank you again for watching. If you made it to the end of this video, well done. It was exceptionally long. Recording it didn't take an hour. It probably took about 3 hours, and editing this is going to be an absolute nightmare. But it's all part of the game. Have fun. I will see you next time.